Hey guys, tonight we dive headfirst into the whirlwind world of the Mongol Postal System. A network so efficient it made the modern internet look like a carrier pigeon on a coffee break. Picture this. You're on the endless Eurasian steppe, the wind whipping past your face as you gallop across vast grasslands, relaying messages that could change the fate of entire kingdoms. The sun blazes down, dust clouds rise, and beneath you, a small but unbreakable horse carries you faster than any courier before. It's brutal. It's relentless. And if you think you'd survive this ride without a scratch, well, you probably won't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're still with me, drop your location and local time in the comments so I can know who's staying up for this wild ride. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Mongol postal system didn't just happen overnight. It's a story wrapped in dust, sweat, and the thunderous beat of tiny hooves. Before Genghis Khan roared his way across Asia in the early 13th century, communication across vast distances was slow and unreliable. Letters often took months to travel between cities, if they arrived at all. But when the Mongols unified under Temujin, better known as Genghis Khan, they faced a problem. How to control an empire that stretched wider than any before it? The answer was as simple as it was genius. Build a postal system that moved faster than any army, that connected distant tribes, conquered cities, and even allowed for emergency military orders to crackle through like lightning. Historians still argue whether the system was an original Mongol invention or adapted from the existing networks in China and Central Asia, but what's clear is that Genghis Khan's Yam, this was the name of the system, became the nervous system of his empire. You can imagine the scale. The Mongol Empire stretched from the steppes of Mongolia deep into Eastern Europe and the Middle East, covering millions of square kilometers. To keep all that territory humming, messengers needed to leapfrog across relay stations spread every 25 to 40 kilometers. Stations stocked with fresh horses, food, and shelter for riders who often risked bandit attacks and brutal weather. This wasn't your neighborhood postal route. This was the backbone of one of the fastest, most connected empires the world had ever seen. One of the quirkiest tidbits about the Yam is that it wasn't just about speed. It was about authority. The messengers carried a special passport, a paitsa, a metal tablet granting them the right to requisition horses, supplies, and even lodging from locals along the route. Refusing a messenger wasn't just rude, it was dangerous. You could face severe penalties. Think of it as the medieval version of "you shall not pass," but with a bureaucratic twist. And here's a fringe tidbit that might raise an eyebrow. Some scholars suggest the Mongols used a kind of relay signaling involving smoke or fire along certain routes to speed up urgent messages even more. The evidence is patchy, but the idea paints a fascinating picture of a semi-telegraph system on the open steppe. It's a reminder that even in the 13th century, humans were inventing ways to bend time and distance. The speed was remarkable. Some messages reportedly traveled over 200 miles in a single day. To put that in perspective, a modern horse gallops around 30 miles per hour but can't sustain that long. The Mongol system relied on quick swaps, fresh mounts, and riders who could push their limits without burning out. It's a wild dance of endurance and efficiency. And while the Mongol postal system's primary purpose was to govern and coordinate, it also carried intelligence, trade news, and sometimes even cultural exchanges, knitting together an empire so vast it almost defied belief. So, as you settle in, remember, this is no gentle stroll through history. You're about to ride shotgun on a horse that's barely bigger than a modern pony, across a world of grass and dust, powered by an empire that rewrote the rules of connection. Ready? You barely catch your breath before you hit the first Yam station, a small outpost barely more than a cluster of yurts, tucked into the endless rolling steppe like a pearl on a dusty necklace. These relay points are the lifeblood of the Mongol postal system, spaced so that neither horse nor rider spends too long on the clock without a break. Think of them as medieval pit stops, but with fewer energy drinks and more boiled mutton. The Yam stations, surprisingly organized for a nomadic empire, operated with a system that would put some modern logistics companies to shame. Each station was stocked with fresh horses, sometimes as many as a dozen, plus food, bedding, and a handful of staff to keep things running smoothly. Riders arriving exhausted could swap mounts within minutes and be back on their way, passing messages, orders, or intelligence with military-grade urgency. These stations weren't just random camps either. Historians still argue whether they were set up primarily as government installations or whether they piggybacked on pre-existing trade routes. But what's certain is that the Mongols expanded and improved them drastically. Some stations grew into small villages or trading hubs over time, especially along major arteries leading to capitals like Karakoram. You might be picturing a dusty, chaotic outpost, but the reality was a surprising blend of order and strict protocol. The station masters kept detailed records, like early traffic controllers, tracking riders' arrivals and departures, ensuring horses were rested and supplies were replenished. They also enforced the sacred nature of the yam. The paitsa, those metal badges of authority, were respected and even feared. No local lord or merchant dared deny passage or refuse aid without risking Genghis Khan's wrath. One quirky custom from some stations involved the use of yak dung cakes as fuel for cooking and warmth. The smell might not win any awards, but it was an efficient way to survive the freezing steppe nights. More bizarrely, some relay points reportedly used dried crocodile dung as a form of sunscreen or skin treatment. Historians debate how widespread or practical this really was, but it's one of those fringe tidbits that adds color to the picture. Imagine your courier lathered in that before a day's ride. Sunburn or not, at least they'd smell unique. The distances between stations weren't set in stone either. Rough terrain, water availability, and security risks all influenced spacing. In the easier grassland sections, stations might be closer, allowing for speedy exchanges. In more rugged or hostile areas, they were farther apart, meaning riders had to push harder. Staff at these stations included not just horse handlers and cooks, but also scouts, medics, and even translators, reflecting the vast and diverse cultures under Mongol rule. Some stations had small armories, ready to arm couriers if bandits or enemy troops threatened. You're not just picking up a horse here, you're stepping into a mini-military base that keeps the empire ticking. Communication wasn't just about physical speed either. Some stations reportedly employed a system of flags, smoke signals, or mirror flashes to alert nearby outposts of incoming riders, or even enemy movements. It's one of those fascinating details historians still squabble over. Did the Mongols develop a semi-telegraph? The evidence is fuzzy, but the possibility adds a bit of sci-fi flair to the dusty plains. Beyond their practical function, yam stations were cultural melting pots. You'd find Turkic, Chinese, Persian, and Mongol riders and staff all mingling, exchanging stories, languages, and sometimes food. This informal cultural exchange helped the empire knit itself together beyond just conquest and control. And here's a bit of a modern twist. The Mongol Postal network has been compared to today's relay races in endurance sports. It was about pacing, teamwork, and strategic handoffs, not just raw speed. The stations provided the structure for a system that depended on precise timing. Miss your horse swap, and the whole message could be delayed, with potentially disastrous consequences. So the next time you're stuck waiting for a package or an email, just remember the yam. A sprawling network of dusty stations where tough riders swapped horses, shared yak dung fuel, and somehow managed to keep the largest land empire in history talking, without a single smartphone in sight. You mount your Mongol horse, a sturdy little beast that might surprise you if you judged it by size alone. These horses, standing just around 12 to 14 hands high, basically ponies by today's standards, were the heart and soul of the entire postal system. Tough as nails and chill as a Zen master, these creatures weren't built for flashy gallops or showy dressage. They were endurance machines, perfectly suited to the unforgiving steppe. You probably think a horse that small couldn't cover hundreds of miles in a day without keeling over. But here's where the Mongols flipped the script. Their horses were adapted to survive bitter winters, scavenge sparse vegetation, and carry their riders across vast, featureless plains with barely a hiccup. Riders would swap horses every 25 to 40 kilometers, meaning no single horse had to exhaust itself. But the real magic was in how these animals endured and recovered. Historians still argue whether the breed was truly unique or a hardy hybrid developed through centuries of nomadic breeding. What's clear is that Mongol horses had remarkable stamina and a laid-back temperament, traits that let them stay calm and steady, even in the chaos of battle or a high-speed relay. They were famously able to survive on minimal water and forage, often nibbling on frozen grass or dry shrubs when nothing else was available. One quirky detail: these horses sometimes slept standing up, a survival trait common in wild horses, but essential on the steppe, where lying down could make you vulnerable to predators or the cold. Imagine that. A horse so chill it takes power naps standing while you prepare to jump back into the saddle. And don't picture these as pampered pets. Mongol horses lived rough. They often had to fend for themselves, braving extreme weather and rugged terrain. Yet despite this, they had an uncanny ability to recover quickly, which was crucial for the postal system's speed. A courier might ride 100 miles, then swap to a fresh horse, while the first horse grazed and rested just enough to be ready for the next leg. Another fringe tidbit you might enjoy: Mongol riders sometimes carried fermented mare's milk, airag, both for themselves and as a treat for their horses, a kind of ancient energy drink and health tonic rolled into one. This not only kept the riders fueled, but supposedly helped horses maintain hydration and stamina, though historians debate how widespread or practical this was during long hauls. These horses also contributed to the empire's military success. Their ability to carry riders swiftly and endure harsh conditions meant Mongol armies could move faster than enemies expected, launching surprise attacks and strategic withdrawals. The postal horses weren't just couriers. They were warriors in their own right, silently powering an empire's conquest. You might think that having so many horses spread across an empire would create chaos or overgrazing, but the Mongols managed grazing carefully. The relay system's spacing allowed horses to rest and forage without exhausting local resources. It's a delicate balance, and scholars still debate how sustainable this was over the long term. Did the horses suffer from the intense demands, or was their natural resilience enough to carry them through? And here's a fun mental image: a Mongol courier swapping horses so frequently that he barely knew his mount's names, treating them less like individual companions and more like teammates in a high-stakes relay race. It was less about bonding and more about mutual trust and efficiency, horses and riders working in concert mile after mile. So next time you see a pony at the petting zoo, remember the Mongol horse, the tiny titan of the steppes, a chill endurance machine that carried messages and armies faster than anyone thought possible, all while looking unbothered by the whole ordeal. You slide into the saddle, the Mongol horse beneath you practically humming with energy. But it's not just the horse that needs to be ready. It's you, the rider. Becoming a Mongol courier wasn't a casual gig. Riders underwent grueling training that turned them into lightning-fast messengers and survival experts all at once. You're expected to push your limits, navigate harsh weather, and deliver messages that could decide the fate of entire regions. No pressure. The training began young, often around adolescence, when boys were first taught to mount and control these spirited steppe horses. But riding wasn't enough. You learned how to endure long rides without rest, how to handle weapons, and even how to survive alone in the vast wilderness if separated from your group. Imagine a cross between a marathon runner, a scout, and a secret agent, but with fewer gadgets and more dirt. Historians still argue whether the Mongols had a formal courier academy, or if training was more of an apprenticeship passed down through families and tribes. What's undisputed is the incredible resilience and skill of these riders. Sometimes they covered over 200 miles in a day, swapping horses seamlessly and navigating hostile territory with uncanny precision. One quirky detail that might make you smile: Mongol couriers were rumored to use a special kind of whistling or humming to communicate with their horses during night rides, guiding them quietly without startling predators or enemies. It's the kind of whisper in history that's hard to verify, but adds a poetic layer to the relationship between rider and steed. Beyond physical endurance, couriers had to memorize complex routes, memorize codes, and maintain strict discipline under stress. Messages were often encoded or carried verbally, so a slip-up could mean disaster. If a courier was caught by enemies, the fate of the message and sometimes the rider was grim. Risk was baked into the job. You might wonder how a messenger stayed sane after days alone, flying across endless grasslands. The answer might surprise you. Couriers often carried small talismans or charms believed to protect them, and some reportedly practiced meditation-like breathing techniques to stay calm and alert. In a way, these ancient riders were the original mindfulness practitioners, just with more dust and less yoga pants. The harshness of the training meant not all survived, but those who did earned a crucial place in the empire's backbone. Their role was respected and sometimes feared, as they held power to deliver orders that could raise or crush armies overnight. And here's a fringe debate. Some scholars speculate that female riders may have served as couriers too, challenging the male-dominated narrative, though concrete evidence remains scarce. Given the Mongols' sometimes surprising flexibility in gender roles, it's a tantalizing possibility. So as you feel the steady trot beneath you, remember, you're not just riding any horse, and you're no casual traveler. You're a finely tuned instrument of empire, trained to endure, to survive, and to connect the farthest corners of a vast, wild world. You grip the reins tighter, the wind sharp against your face as you speed across the steppe, clutching a message that might just change the course of history, or get you killed. The Mongol postal system wasn't just about fast horses and steady riders. It was also about secrecy and survival. After all, a message lost or intercepted could mean disaster for an entire army or region. Security was paramount. Riders often carried encrypted messages or used verbal codes memorized by heart, because a written note could fall into enemy hands if the courier was captured. Historians still argue about the exact methods of encryption the Mongols used. Some say it was a simple substitution cipher. Others think they employed more sophisticated systems inspired by Chinese or Persian traditions. What's clear is that message security was treated like military intelligence. Risk was baked into every journey. Bandits, rival tribes, harsh weather, and enemy soldiers lurked along every route. If a messenger was caught, the consequences were severe, not just for the rider but for the entire chain of command. Some accounts tell of captured messengers choosing death over revealing secrets. Others speak of brutal punishments inflicted by Mongol leaders to deter betrayal. You can almost feel the weight of responsibility riding alongside you. One quirky tidbit: some couriers carried miniature seals or tokens that served as proof of authenticity. If someone presented a message without the correct seal, it was automatically suspect. In a way, it was like the medieval version of two-factor authentication, except instead of a code on your phone, you had a heavy metal stamp and a killer horse. Beyond encryption and authentication, the Mongol postal system had contingency plans. Riders traveling in hostile territory sometimes traveled in small groups for protection, or carried weapons for self-defense. And if a courier was lost or delayed, backup messengers might be dispatched, ensuring that the vital information had a better chance of reaching its destination. You might wonder what happened if a rider couldn't deliver a message. In some cases, the Mongols developed a strict protocol. If a message failed to arrive in time, the recipient was to assume worst-case scenarios and prepare accordingly. This sort of built-in paranoia kept commanders alert and ready to adapt on the fly. A fringe speculation among historians is that some Mongol couriers used pigeons or other animals as backup message carriers on certain routes, though hard evidence is scarce. It adds a fun, almost cinematic layer to the whole operation, imagining feathered allies racing alongside riders across the steppes. So, as you race onward, the message burning in your satchel, remember this: your life and the fate of empires depend on your speed, your secrecy, and your skill. The Mongol postal system was as much a gamble as it was a marvel, where the stakes were nothing less than survival. You barely have time to catch your breath before you realize just how critical this postal system is. Not just for racing horses and daring riders, but for keeping the sprawling Mongol Empire connected and humming along. Imagine trying to govern an empire that stretches from the heart of Asia all the way to Eastern Europe without an efficient way to communicate. The Yam wasn't just a courier service. It was the nervous system that kept Genghis Khan's legacy alive. Orders, intelligence, tax reports, trade updates, they all zipped across the network at speeds unheard of for the era. This rapid communication allowed Mongol governors to respond swiftly to rebellions, deploy troops with surgical precision, and keep distant vassals in line. It was governance on a scale that had never been attempted before, and it only worked because of the relentless efficiency of the postal system. Historians still debate exactly how much the yam directly influenced the empire's stability. Some argue that without it, the Mongol conquests would have crumbled under their own vastness, while others suggest that the empire's brutal military dominance mattered more than its communication lines. But there's no denying that the yam was a major player. Beyond politics and war, the postal system fueled commerce like a turbocharger. Merchants could get news of markets, prices, and trade routes quickly, allowing goods, from silk and spices to precious metals, to flow with unprecedented speed. The Mongols effectively laid the groundwork for a proto-global trade network, one that linked east and west in ways that would influence the Silk Road for centuries. One fascinating detail: the yam stations sometimes doubled as customs checkpoints, where goods and traders had to pay tolls or tariffs. This system not only funded the postal network, but also helped the empire monitor and control trade. A primitive but surprisingly effective regulatory mechanism. There's also a quirky rumor that some Mongol couriers carried small amounts of tea leaves or other luxury goods, not just for themselves, but as gifts or trade items to grease wheels along their routes. It's a reminder that even in the harshness of conquest, diplomacy and commerce found their place. The postal system's reach even extended to cultural exchange. Artists, scholars, and travelers used the same routes, carrying stories, ideas, and innovations across vast distances. This exchange softened the Mongol image from ruthless conquerors to facilitators of one of the most significant cross-cultural interactions in history. So next time you grumble about slow internet or lost packages, think about the yam, a network that kept an empire together and opened the ancient world to trade, culture, and rapid communication long before the telegram or the telegraph. It's a reminder that connection has always been a powerful weapon and tool. You felt the rush of the Mongol horses, the wind whipping past the yam stations, and now it's time to see how that legacy rippled far beyond the 13th century steppes. The Mongol postal system didn't just serve its empire, it set a template that inspired communication networks across Eurasia for centuries to come. After the Mongol Empire fractured, successor states and neighboring powers saw the power of rapid communication firsthand and sought to emulate aspects of the yam. The Persian Ilkhanate, the Golden Horde, and the Yuan dynasty in China all maintained or adapted versions of the relay stations and courier services, keeping the wheels of empire turning. Historians still argue about the direct lines of influence. Was it the Mongol system inspiring the later Russian yam stations, or were those independently developed? What's clear is that the word yam itself was absorbed into Russian vocabulary as a term for postal relay stations, a linguistic nod to Mongol impact. In Europe, news of the Mongol communication network sparked intrigue. While the continent's own postal systems remained fragmented and slow, merchants and diplomats realized the value of fast, reliable messaging. Some historians speculate that the Mongol model indirectly influenced the development of the Russian and Polish postal networks in the centuries that followed. You might be surprised to learn that even the famed Silk Road's later iterations benefited from Mongol postal innovations. Relay stations became more common, improving the safety and speed of trade caravans. The system's emphasis on organized rest stops and fresh horses echoed in travelogues and merchant guides for generations. A quirky and lesser-known tidbit. Some Mongol postal routes reportedly inspired early European courier services to experiment with mounted messengers and relay techniques, albeit on a smaller scale and without the empire-sized infrastructure. It's a reminder that good ideas, like well-trained horses, tend to get around. The Mongol legacy in communication technology wasn't just about horses and stations. It shaped ideas about state control, information flow, and the logistical backbone necessary for empire. This system demonstrated that a ruler's power wasn't just the sword or the army, but the speed at which they could send and receive information. While modern postal and telecommunication systems are light years ahead in technology, the principles of relayed communication, strategic rest points, and message authentication trace back to innovations like the yam. It's a fascinating chain of continuity that ties your text message back to the thundering hooves of Mongol couriers centuries ago. So, as you glance at your phone or watch a package tracker obsessively, tip your hat to those first riders who blazed trails across the steppe, quietly shaping how the world stayed connected, long before the digital age was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. You step off your horse into the lively chaos of a yam station, but this isn't just a pit stop. It's a place brimming with curious customs and quirky traditions. These relay points were as much social hubs as logistical centers, each with its own local flavor, weird rules, and sometimes downright odd rituals. For starters, the yam stations often hosted strict taboos about food and drink. Some stations forbade the consumption of certain meats, like beef or horse meat, out of respect for local customs or religious beliefs. In one particularly quirky example, some stations along the Silk Road were known for serving fermented mare's milk, or aerag, which tasted like a fizzy, tangy yogurt but was the energy drink of choice for riders and staff alike. The smell? Not so great. There were also fascinating rituals tied to the paisa, the metal tablets messengers carried. At some stations, the paisa was ceremonially cleaned or blessed before riders set out, a kind of medieval good luck charm to ensure safe passage. Some stations even had shrines or small altars dedicated to the gods of travel and protection. A spiritual layer beneath the brutal practicality. Historians still debate how widespread these spiritual practices were. Were they official parts of the postal system, or local additions that crept in over time? Regardless, they add a human dimension to the story. A blend of faith, fear, and hope wrapped up in every relay stop. Another odd custom was the enforcement of fasting days at certain stations, where riders and staff refrained from eating during daylight hours, purportedly to conserve energy or as a form of spiritual discipline. Whether this actually improved stamina or was just a cruel tradition is still up for debate. Imagine trying to ride hard while starving yourself. And here's a charmingly strange tidbit. Some yam stations kept message dogs, trained to recognize certain riders or carry small items short distances, serving as loyal, if unconventional, postal assistants. While it sounds like the setup for a medieval fantasy novel, some accounts suggest dogs helped bridge gaps where horses couldn't go easily, like dense forests or rocky terrain. Food at these stations was humble but hearty. Boiled mutton, dried curds, and millet porridge were staples, designed to fuel riders for the next grueling leg. But the taste? Let's just say it probably wouldn't win any Michelin stars. You can almost feel the grit of dust in your teeth as you bite into the chewy fare. Social rules were strict, too. Yam stations enforced sharp hierarchies, where a courier with a paisa had the right to demand lodging, food, and horses. Refusal wasn't just rude, it could bring severe consequences, a reminder that the empire's reach was absolute even in these far-flung outposts. So, as you lounge in the dusty shade of the station, nursing that questionable meal and watching riders come and go, you're part of a living tradition. A quirky, sometimes bizarre mix of discipline, superstition, and raw survival that kept the Mongol postal system pulsing across the vast steppe. You pause for a moment, feeling the dust settle around you, but beneath that calm lies a whirlwind of questions historians still wrestle with. How effective was the Mongol postal system really? Was it the unstoppable marvel it's often made out to be? Or were there serious limitations and failures buried beneath the legend? The truth is, the yam was both brilliant and imperfect. Some scholars argue that its reach, while impressive, wasn't as uniform as once believed. Remote regions and unstable borderlands may have had patchy or unreliable service. The vast distances and harsh climates inevitably introduced delays and failures that could cost lives or shift battles. Another debate centers on the system's sustainability. Maintaining thousands of horses, stations, and riders required immense resources. Did the environmental strain on pastures contribute to degradation? Were there shortages during harsh winters or droughts? The Mongol Empire's reliance on a nomadic economy may have helped mitigate some issues, but the long-term impact remains murky. Security, too, had its cracks. Despite encryption and protocols, messengers were vulnerable to bandits, rival factions, or enemy spies. Some routes reportedly saw frequent ambushes, forcing riders to take dangerous detours or travel in armed groups, which slowed down the system. And then there's the human factor. Couriers were mortal and prone to fatigue, illness, or desertion. Records show occasional breakdowns in the relay, causing critical messages to be delayed or lost. The Mongols had backup plans, but even they couldn't eliminate all risk. One quirky but telling detail. Some scholars highlight Mongol reluctance to permanently station large garrisons at relay points, favoring mobility over fixed posts. While this fit their nomadic culture, it may have limited the postal network's resilience in unstable areas. Some fringe theories suggest that the Mongol postal system's fame may have been exaggerated in later historical accounts, romanticized as part of the empire's legend. Others propose that similar systems existed in parallel, making it less unique than commonly thought. Still, despite the debates, there's broad consensus that the Yam was a pioneering feat of logistics and communication, unprecedented for its time. Its failures don't diminish its impact. Instead, they highlight the extraordinary challenge of managing an empire that spanned continents. So as you reflect on the thunderous hooves and dusty relay stations, remember that even the most impressive systems have their shadows, mysteries and imperfections woven into the fabric of history, waiting for curious minds to unravel. You're nearing the end of this vast journey across the Mongol postal system, and it's time to slow down and reflect on the true legacy of those tireless horses and the empire they powered. The Yam wasn't just a method of sending messages. It was a lifeline that helped transform a patchwork of nomadic tribes into the largest contiguous empire in history. The humble Mongol horses, with their unmatched stamina and calm temperament, became legends in their own right. They carried more than riders. They bore the weight of communication, culture, and conquest. Their endurance softened the brutal image of Mongol expansion, reminding us that behind every sweeping invasion was the quiet, steady pulse of connection. Historians still debate the nuances of the Yam's operation and impact, but what cannot be denied is its influence on communication systems that followed. From Russian postal routes borrowing the name Yam to the evolution of trade networks along the Silk Road, the Mongol system laid foundational principles of speed, relay, and reliability. And as you picture those chill little horses standing calmly in the steppe breeze, ready to carry their riders into the next leg of an empire-spanning relay, it's easy to see why they earned their place in history. They embody a paradox: small but mighty, simple yet revolutionary, restless but unshakably steady. So as this story winds down, imagine the fading sun casting long shadows over the grasslands, the soft murmur of a distant stream, and the gentle snuffle of horses settling for the night. The thundering hooves slow to a soft rhythm, and the empire's heartbeat quiets, ready to race again with the dawn. Thank you for riding along on this journey through the Mongol postal system and its surprisingly chill horses. Remember, history is often powered not just by kings and warriors, but by the quiet endurance of those who connect us all. Now slow your breathing as we drift toward the wind down. The vast steppes stretch endlessly under a velvet sky, stars twinkling softly like distant campfires. The day's dust settles on your skin, your body relaxing with each breath. The horses, ever patient, stand quietly, their breaths gentle puffs in the cooling air. The relay is done for now, but the spirit of connection lingers in the hush of night. You feel the warmth of this ancient bond, a world once bridged by hooves and heartbeats, now whispered softly into your dreams. May the quiet endurance of those Mongol horses inspire your own journey, steady and sure, as you drift into restful sleep. Good night.